recovering this way is no longer so suggestible to the opinions of others, and as he regains confidence, as he sees how acceptance works, he is no longer so vulnerable to his own destructive suggestion that he will never recover. Indeed, he glimpses at last the way out of his darkness. As bewilderment lessens, and he finds less and less to be anxious about, introspection lessens, and interest in the outside world returns, so that the feeling of unreality gradually disappears. And as interest returns, depression lifts. He is beginning to be his old self once more. Just as each step led into nervous illness, now each step leads out of nervous illness. With the healing that understanding and acceptance bring, the pattern unfolds once more, step by step, but this time toward recovery. The talk to follow will be about depression. So far, I have been mostly concerned in these talks with people made ill by fear of the state they are in, by fear of what their nerves are doing to them, rather than by fear of any particular problem. Of course, there are many people who have been made nervously ill and kept ill by some apparently insoluble problem, by some conflict, sorrow, guilt, or disgrace. However, the advice given in these talks on how to cope with the physical symptoms and the strange experiences of nervous illness will help people cope with themselves while they try to cope with their particular problem. Now, I have stressed again and again the folly of fighting one's nervous symptoms. I have shown how much nervous illness may be started and kept alive by fighting. I stress this because there is such widespread misconception today that one should fight one's nerves. Friends, even some doctors, don't hesitate to say, "You'll have to fight this thing, old man. You mustn't let this get the better of you." And this advice is often given in a tone of voice of doom to follow if it is not obeyed. But fighting the way a nervously ill person invariably fights means more and more tension, therefore more and more suffering, and so more bewilderment, more fear. Bewilderment and fear can themselves create nervous illness, so the advice to fight one's nerves can be more damaging than helpful. You might well ask, but what of depression? Surely this is the one illness we should fight. We can't let depression get a hold on us. We must fight depression. My answer is still the same. There is a far better way of coping with depression than by fighting it. I don't mean that you should sit and gaze apathetically at the ceiling. I mean something very different from apathetic ceiling gazing, as I will now show you. People with a habit of recurring depression respond so quickly and so acutely to even a mildly depressing atmosphere that they have but to see lowering clouds at dusk or hear rooks in the belfry to literally feel their spirits sink. Usually their attention is soon distracted and they quickly recover. However, they need have only a few such experiences in close succession to be convinced that a bout of depression is on its way. Then they immediately become apprehensive, afraid. Who wouldn't? There's nothing quite as depressing as depression. And because depressed reaction usually comes when such people are overtired, the added strain of apprehension and fear of depression drains their emotions still further and so makes depression more likely to descend. Let us look closely at such a person and see the mistakes made, mistakes that not only invite depression but prolong its visit. You will see that these mistakes arise very much from trying to fight first the thought of approaching depression and then from trying to fight depression itself. Let us look at a housewife who suffers from depression. I also choose a woman who is subject to frequent bouts of rather severe depression, so that the lurking shadow of depression may never be far away. Of course, what I say applies to men as well as women. Many men become depressed, especially men whose work demands much emotional energy. First, this housewife, whom we are about to consider, dread and fears depression, so that when she feels one of her bouts approaching, she may rush feverishly through her work, trying to fill each moment, so that she will have no time to think about that hovering cloud, The fight has begun. And when her work is finished, she is so afraid to be alone, occupied with her thoughts, her feelings, she's off visiting one friend after another. She's off to the cinema, away to the supermarket, rushing here, rushing there, trying to forget the state she is in, trying to push away the threat of depression. But all the time, even when out, she watches herself apprehensively, thinking, oh my goodness, is it still there? I hope it won't come back when I get home. It is difficult to forget something while trying so hard to forget. The best way to remember is to try too hard to forget. So by feverishly rushing around, trying to ward off depression, trying so hard to forget that it threatens, this woman may succeed only in emphasizing the threat. Also, agitated rushing is very tiring, so she becomes overtired, tense and irritable. Putting on an act before the family is also a strain, so the tension mounts and gradually brings sensitization. And the wave of fear she feels then, when she thinks of approaching depression, becomes more and more acute. This spasm of fear comes in the pit of her stomach, in the exact spot where she feels the sinking feeling of depression. Indeed, there's so little to choose between these two feelings, fear and depression, that as the fear mounts, she translates this feeling of fear into the feeling of depression itself, and is finally convinced that depression has arrived. At this point, she despairs, and despair is the finishing touch. She has but to feel one flash of utter despair to at last admit to herself and to the family that she really is having one of her bouts. And now comes the barrage of advice from family and friends. Pull yourself together, Mother. Snap out of it, Mother. Fight it, Mother. As if she hasn't already been fighting it for days, weeks, and getting nowhere.